The first lie they told you about Venice is the most elegant. It was not a city built nor a lagoon. It is the visible crown of a civilization that was drowned by one. We are asked to believe in a technology that could petrify entire forests for foundations, a miracle of engineering used only once, and then erased from history, a logistical paradox bordering on insanity. If you have always felt this cognitive dissonance, this quiet hum of a story that does not add up, leave your mark below. Tell us from where, and at what time, you are joining this investigation. The official narrative is a tranquil watercolor painting. Now, let us open the crime scene photographs. Let us become forensic observers of the impossible. We are told to look at the grand paintings of Canaletto, the first grainy photographs of the 19th century, and see a triumph of human spirit. But we will look with new eyes. We will see the evidence of a crime. On one hand, the architecture. Feel the cold, mathematical precision of the marble palaces, rising from the water as if grown, not built. Trace the impossible symmetry of the arches, the delicate filigree of the stonework, the defiant expressions on statues that have weathered 1,000 years of salt and spray. The Spanish conquistadors claimed they were astonished by its scale and sophistication, and then, in an act of supreme historical vandalism, they claimed to have raised it and built their own city on top. But what if they didn't build? What if they simply occupied? What if Tenochtitlan was just the local name for another node in the same global network, built by the same forgotten architects, and the Aztecs were merely the final, degraded inheritors of a place whose original purpose they no longer understood? Venice, St. Petersburg, Amsterdam, Tenochtitlan. The pattern is a viral code embedded in the stone of our world. This is not the work of disparate cultures coincidentally arriving at the same engineering solutions. This is a fingerprint, a calling card left by a single, unified, technologically advanced maritime civilization that spanned the globe. A civilization whose name has been systematically erased from our memory, a name that now only survives in the whispers of forbidden history, Tartary. These were not just cities. They were components, interlinked power stations in a planetary energy grid. This is the key that unlocks the entire mystery. The obsession with building on water was not an aesthetic choice, nor was it purely for defense or trade. The water was a functional element of their technology. This is the work of gods, or a civilization with a technology so far beyond our own historical model that it may as well be magic. This is inherited technology, silent and perfect. Now look at the other hand. Look at the people in these same images. See them in their crude wooden boats, little more than hollowed logs. Observe their primitive tools, their simple clothes, the apparent squalor and disorder of their daily lives. The cognitive dissonance is a physical shock. The technology to construct these divine structures is utterly, violently divorced from the technology of those who inhabit them. It is the ultimate peasant paradox. We are shown a tribe from the Bronze Age who have inexplicably found themselves living in a dormant starship. They use its corridors as streets and its hangars as markets, but they cannot begin to comprehend the machine they are crawling upon. They did not build this. They are squatters in the ruins of a fallen empire. But the most damning evidence is not in the grand vistas. It is at the waterline. I want you to look, really look, at the so-called ground floors of Venice. Your architectural logic will scream in protest. You will see countless doors that open to nowhere but the dark, lapping water. The canals, filled with conductive salt and mineral-rich water, were not merely transport arteries. They were the cooling system and the liquid conductor for the immense energy being harnessed by the city machine itself. And what was the engine? Look up. Look at the spires, the obelisks, the campaniles, the bell towers. We are told they were for calling the faithful to prayer or for decoration. An absurdly simplistic explanation for such ubiquitous and complex structures. These were not religious symbols. They were atmospheric energy antennas. They drew down electrostatic energy from the ionosphere, channeling it into the city's grid. The ornate metalwork, the crosses, the spheres atop these spires, these were not ornaments. They were terminals and capacitors. The entire city was a machine, resonating with the Earth's own electromagnetic field, a vast instrument of free, wireless energy. And with this understanding, the darkest chapter of this reset comes into focus. The Great Plagues. The Black Death. We are told these were tragic random outbreaks of disease spread by rats and poor hygiene. Another cover narrative. How does a plague empty a city of advanced builders but leave their indestructible architecture perfectly intact for new inhabitants? It doesn't. The plagues were a weapon, a biological agent deployed by the usurpers, the force that brought this global civilization to its knees. You will see elegant windows, perfectly carved, that gaze directly into the canal's murky reflection, their sills permanently wet. This is not design. This is an anomaly. No sane engineer, in any era, builds an entrance that guarantees a flood. What we are seeing are not ground floors. They are the second, perhaps third, stories of a topography that no longer exists. They are the high water marks of a civilization buried in a cataclysm. Follow the dark stain that creeps up the base of every building. They call it algae, a simple product of dampness. But it is too uniform, too consistent across the entire city. This is not a stain, it is a tide line. It is the permanent marker of the great mud flood, a scar left by the event that rewrote the very ground beneath their feet. And look closer still. See where the masterful ancient stonework meets rough, hurried brick. See the filled-in archways, the sealed windows below the current water level. This is the clumsy suture over the wound. This is the work of the inheritors, the survivors, patching up a world they did not build and could not understand, adapting the magnificent ruins to their new, aquatic reality. Look closely at this frame. Study the water lapping at a windowsill that was clearly meant for a street. It was the most efficient way to achieve the Great Reset. Eliminate the original operators of the technology without damaging the priceless infrastructure. Sterilize the hardware of its rightful owners. The surviving pockets of humanity, traumatized and disconnected from their own science, were left to wander the empty, silent cities. The new powers, the parasites, then moved in, initiating the phase of repopulation. They brought in new people, gave them a new, fabricated history, a new religion, a new identity. They taught them that their ancestors were primitive, and that these magnificent ruins were built by their new masters. The evidence for this global system is not just in these famous waterlogged capitals. The architectural language, this classical or Baroque style, is a global constant. It appears in the American Midwest, the Australian outback, the heart of Siberia, and the port cities of Japan. It is the ghost of a world that was. We live inside the amputated limbs of this former giant, mistaking them for complete bodies. We are a culture with profound amnesia, and our cities are the monuments to our forgotten past. These structures are everywhere. The pattern is right in front of you. You have seen these buildings, these architectural fingerprints, in your own city, haven't you? Old banks, post offices, courthouses, with their colossal columns, their impossible stonework, and their familiar sunken windows. If you too see the impossibility, if you feel the deep, logical wrongness of it all, then you are a witness. Acknowledge what you see. Mark this video with your like, not for me, but to signal to others that the evidence is clear, and the official silence is no longer acceptable. What we are looking at is not a city sinking gracefully into the sea. We are looking at the exposed rooftops of a drowned world. This is not a marvel of construction. It is a tomb, slowly revealing its true, monumental scale. The scene of the crime is Venice itself. And so, we arrive at the official story, the one written in every textbook, repeated in every guided tour. The accepted truth. It is a tale of heroism and ingenuity, a legend designed to inspire. But like all well-crafted legends, it begins to fray under the slightest pressure of logical scrutiny. We are told that in the 5th century, as the Roman world crumbled under the weight of barbarian invasions, terrified refugees fled to the marshes of the Venetian lagoon. They were a displaced people, running for their lives with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the trauma of a collapsing world. And here, in this inhospitable malarial swamp, a logistical nightmare of mud and salt water, these destitute survivors, we are asked to believe, decided to build one of the most complex and breathtaking architectural marvels in human history. Tell us where you have seen them. The first step in reclaiming our inheritance is to simply open our eyes and map the true borders of our lost global homeland. And so, the great silence fell. After the plagues, after the frequency shift, after the very ground beneath the old world turned to liquid memory, a quiet descended. The inheritors came later. Not as conquerors, but as scavengers, as squatters in the halls of forgotten kings. They were us. We are the children of the survivors, living in the shadow of a civilization so advanced, we have mistaken its ruins for the pinnacle of our own achievement. This is the most tragic irony of our condition. We are ignorant tenants in a technological palace, convinced we built the place ourselves with mud and sticks. Anthropologists have a term for this phenomenon, observed in primitive tribes encountering advanced technology for the first time. They call it a cargo cult. When islanders saw great metal birds descend from the sky, bringing forth gods and wonders, they did not understand the principles of aerodynamics or logistics. When the birds left, the islanders built effigies of them from straw and wood. They carved runways into the hills and lit fires to guide them home, performing the rituals of the gods without understanding their function. Let us pause and allow the sheer absurdity of that premise to resonate. This is the foundational myth, the narrative of coverage. It asks us to accept that a population without resources, without a stable food supply, without pre-existing infrastructure, and most critically, without a documented tradition of advanced marine engineering, somehow mastered a hostile environment that would challenge even modern builders with all their technology. They didn't just survive, they supposedly orchestrated a symphony of logistics, quarrying marble from distant mountains, felling entire forests for foundations, and erecting palaces of impossible grace on a substrate of shifting mud. It is a logistical paradox of such magnitude that it insults the intelligence. It is the equivalent of claiming that shipwrecked sailors on a deserted island built a nuclear reactor out of coconuts and bamboo. The dissonance is deafening. They present us with a cause, frightened, impoverished refugees, and, in effect, a floating metropolis of sublime engineering that are utterly, irreconcilably disconnected. And are you truly expected to accept this narrative at face value? Or do you, like us, feel the deep, unsettling tremor of a story that simply doesn't hold together? This is where the tale requires a scapegoat for the technological chasm, a convenient plot device to explain away the impossible. Enter the serene Republic of Venice. They were mimicking the form, completely divorced from the substance. They were performing a ritual of hope, born from a profound technological misunderstanding. Now, look at Venice. Look at us. We are that cargo cult, on a planetary scale. We live inside the machine, yet we no longer know how to turn it on. We perform the rituals, but the gods of technology never return. The gondola is the perfect, heartbreaking effigy, a slender, primitive vessel, pulled by hand through the flooded superhighways of a metropolis. Imagine the cognitive dissonance. To navigate a city of impossible geometric precision, of marble facades that defy 1,000 years of salt and water, using a wooden boat that is, in essence, a floating plank. It is the technological equivalent of finding a lost civilization that uses horse-drawn carts to travel on a perfectly preserved magnetic levitation network. The gondola is not a symbol of Venetian ingenuity, it is a monument to our regression. It is the straw airplane of a post-cataclysmic humanity, a solution so crude, so laughably inefficient compared to the environment it navigates, that its very existence is the most damning evidence of a technological reset. We did not design these waterways. We are simply doing our best to survive in them. This pattern of mimicry, of ritualizing lost function, is coded into the very fabric of the city. The story shifts. We are told that as the centuries passed, these humble refugees transformed into shrewd merchants, their city accumulating vast wealth through trade. This gold, the narrative insists, is the magic ingredient that made it all possible. But this is a deliberate misdirection, a sleight of hand to distract from the core anomaly. No amount of gold can purchase knowledge that does not exist. Wealth cannot, by itself, invent a lost science. You cannot pay a medieval stonemason to operate a laser cutter he has never seen, and you cannot pay a 15th century engineer to design petrified, corrosion-proof foundations with a technology that has vanished from the face of the earth. The wealth of Venice did not build the city's impossible foundations. The city's impossible pre-existing foundations are what allowed the accumulation of wealth. The asset came before the administrators. We are given the names of the architects, the Palladios, the Sansovinos, masters of the visible world, artists of the facade. They are presented as the authors of this miracle. But we must ask the forbidden questions. Where are their engineering plans? Not the beautiful, artistic renderings of a palace's exterior, but the structural blueprints for the subaquatic world. Where are the technical manuals for driving millions of colossal, petrified pilings into the seabed with millimeter precision? Look to the Piazza San Marco. We are told the two great columns were trophies, looted from Constantinople. A story of conquest, a cover narrative to explain the presence of objects that do not belong. But they are not mere pillars, they are components, they are pieces of a machine. Silent, harmonic resonators perhaps? Tuning forks of granite, designed to interact with the energy grid of the old world, their placement calculated to the millimeter to manage the flow of atmospheric power. The inheritors, the new parasites, saw only their form, not their function. Lacking the knowledge to operate them, they did what all cargo cults do. They defunctionalized them and turned them into symbols. They placed statues of their new saints and their new logos atop these silent engines, transforming active technology into passive monuments. They are not trophies of war, they are the decommissioned terminals of a forgotten internet, now used as flagpoles. The mimicry becomes even more profound when it bleeds into culture. The Carnival of Venice, we see a festival of masks and decadence. But what if it is the ghost of a civic function? What if, in the old world, this period was a time of energy calibration, when the atmospheric ether was thick and the city machine required a specific human interaction to maintain its balance? Where are the metallurgical reports on the alloys used for the hidden reinforcements? There is nothing. A void, the great silence. The absence of this documentation is not a historical accident. It is the most damning evidence of all. It proves that these men, brilliant as they were not the original architects. They were remodelers. They were decorators. They were the first and most successful administrators of a vast and ancient inheritance. They did not build Venice. They inherited it. They woke up inside the abandoned space station and learned how to operate the light switches, rebranding the control panels with their own family crests. The narrative of the founding families and their genius architects is not history. It is an origin story created to legitimize their claim on this piece of inherited technology. They were not the authors of the book. They were simply the first to find the library and claim they wrote all the volumes within. They took a masterpiece of a forgotten age and signed their names in the corner. The story of refugees and merchants is a comforting bedtime story, a fairy tale crafted to conceal a truth far more profound and disturbing. We are living in the ruins of a world far more advanced than our own, and the history we have been taught is the engineering of oblivion itself. What if the masks were not for disguise, but for protection? Shielding from bioelectric fields or resonant frequencies that the original inhabitants understood and harnessed. Today, we wear the masks as a hollow echo, a folk memory of a forgotten safety protocol. We have ritualized the technology. The function is gone, but the pageant remains, a beautiful empty shell. And the most poignant ritual of all, the Sposalizio del Mare, the marriage of the sea. The Doge would sail out and cast a consecrated ring into the waters, symbolizing Venice's maritime dominion. A lovely story. But it is a ritual born of fear and amnesia. It is the act of a culture that no longer understands its relationship with the very element that defines it. The water was not an enemy to be conquered or a bride to be appeased. It was a component, a coolant, a conductor, an integral part of the city's operating system. This ceremony is the ultimate cargo cult act, a desperate, symbolic attempt to control a force that was once a willing partner. It is the profound sadness of a species trying to bargain with the ruins of its own superior engineering. This is not limited to Venice. It is our shared inheritance. We see spires on ancient buildings and call them bell towers or minarets, placing crosses and crescents atop them. We have peeled back the layers of the official story, the comforting fable of resourceful refugees. We have exposed it for what it is, a narrative of convenience, a cover story for a profound logistical paradox. But now, we must leave the realm of narrative and enter the cold, unforgiving world of the audit. This is where romanticism dies, and the brutal, unyielding logic of mathematics takes command. They tell us a story of heroic builders. We will now examine their balance sheets, their supply chain manifests, and their energy expenditure reports, or rather, the complete and deafening absence of them. This is the forensic accounting of an impossible construction, the point at which the fairy tale shatters against the bedrock of physical law. Let us begin with a single structure, the magnificent Church of Santa Maria della Salute. The official history, stated with unwavering confidence, tells us it stands upon a foundation of more than 1,100,000 timber piles. Let us pause and allow that number to resonate. 1.1 million individual timber piles, each reportedly up to 15 meters long, driven into the unstable sediment of the lagoon. We are not dealing with a quaint construction project. We are describing an industrial operation of a scale that would challenge modern corporations. We never ask why a global civilization, separated by oceans, all decided to build the same copper-topped antennas. We find vast vaulted structures of impossible acoustics and call them cathedrals, turning resonant power stations into houses of worship. We perform our rituals under the silent, watching eyes of a technology we can no longer comprehend. We are a species with amnesia singing hymns inside a particle accelerator, convinced it was built for the glory of a god, because we have forgotten that we were once the ones who commanded the lightning. The melancholy you feel when you walk these ancient streets is real. It is the faint, cellular memory of a time when we were more. It is the soul recognizing the grandeur of its own lost home. If this vision of a humanity adrift in the ruins of its own forgotten greatness resonates with you, if you feel the echo of this lost truth in your own mind, then check if you are subscribed. We need more awakened minds to piece together the fragments of this great, shattered mirror. We need to stop worshiping the machine and start remembering how to rebuild it. It was not a flood. A flood is an act of nature. It is chaotic, impartial, and it recedes. This was an act of engineering. First, the raw material. The timber, we are told, was larch and alder, felled in the forests of Slovenia, Croatia, and the distant Dolomites. 1,100,000 mature trees. Visualize the scale of this deforestation. We are talking about the clear-cutting of entire mountain ranges. An ecological footprint so vast it would leave a permanent scar on the face of Europe, visible for centuries. Where are the records of this monumental environmental transformation? Where are the land acquisition deeds, the logging contracts, the tithes paid to local lords for the utter annihilation of their woodlands? The great silence begins here. Now, transport. This is not a matter of a few ox carts. We must calculate the tonnage. An average 15-meter larch pile weighs approximately 500 kilograms. Multiplied by 1.1 million, we arrive at a staggering 550,000 tons of timber. 550,000 tons of raw logs that had to be moved from high-altitude forests, down rivers, and then across the Adriatic Sea. This would necessitate a continuous, dedicated fleet of hundreds of cargo ships, operating for decades. The Venetian lagoon, the very heart of their supposed maritime empire, would have been choked not with spice galleons, but with an endless flotilla of crude timber barges. It would have been a permanent traffic jam, a logistical nightmare paralyzing all other commerce. A termination event. It began not with a wave, but with a frequency, a single, planetary hum that resonated with the silica and water held captive in the earth. The ground did not sink, it dissolved. Soil became slurry, stone became liquid, foundations became graves in an instant. This was not a slow decline into the sea, it was a catastrophic vertical burial, a liquefaction event so precise, so targeted, it could only be the result of a weapon. This was the Great Reset, the day the world was turned to mud, and into the silence that followed, they came. The survivors, the opportunists, the inheritors, the parasites. They crawled from their bunkers or sailed to the shores of this half-drowned world, and they did not see a tragedy to mourn. They saw real estate. A global infrastructure of impossible beauty and power, now vacant. Its owners, its operators, its architects, gone, wiped from the board. And the first act of this new administration was not to rebuild. It was to erase, to initiate the great engineering of forgetting. This is the most brutal part of the crime. Not the cataclysm itself, but the meticulous, cold-blooded murder of memory that followed. How do you claim a masterpiece you did not create? First, you burn the artist's signature. Where are the naval manifests for this timber fleet? Where are the records of the thousands of sailors, stevedores, and port administrators required to manage this single, colossal supply line? Their absence is not an oversight, it is an anomaly. And then comes the work itself. The energy required to drive a single 15-meter pile through dense, waterlogged sand and clay to reach a stable substrate is immense. To do it 1.1 million times with the precision required to support a marble basilica is a feat that borders on the physically impossible with 17th century technology. They show us paintings of primitive wooden cranes and human-powered pile drivers. This is a deliberate deception. The physics do not comply. The cumulative energy expenditure would be comparable to that of a modern offshore oil platform's construction. We are asked to believe this was accomplished by men fueled by bread and wine, using hemp ropes and wooden pulleys. This is not a construction plan. It is an insult to our intelligence. It violates the laws of thermodynamics. Where was the industrial engine to power this? Who fed, housed, and paid the army of thousands of specialized laborers needed on-site for the 35 years of foundation work alone? This phantom workforce, the largest in European history for a single project, built a miracle and then vanished from the census, leaving no barracks, no kitchens, no graves. Strategic fires, recorded in the new histories as mere accidents. The fire in the Doge's palace in 1577 was not an accident. It was an archival burn, a cleansing. In those flames vanished the true records, the blueprints of the impossible, the manuals for the etheric engines, the celestial charts that powered the city, the true chronicles of the builders. Everything that proved the official story was a lie was turned to ash. Then you invent a new history, a cover narrative, a bedtime story for a traumatized, infantile new humanity. They gave us the tale of brave refugees in the swamp, a heroic myth to mask a squatter's claim. They gave us merchant families and doges, presenting them as the architects of genius when they were merely the first board of directors for a hostile takeover. Their vast wealth did not come from trading silks and spices. It came from inheriting and dismantling a technology they could barely comprehend. Their gold did not build Venice. It was merely the currency used to purchase its silence. They sealed the lower levels with crude brickwork not just to keep the water out, but to hide the evidence, to lock away the anachronisms that screamed of a different timeline. Every brick they laid was a word in a lie. The salute is not an exception. It is the rule. The Rialto Bridge, they say, rests on 12,000 piles. The Ducal Palace, the Campanales, every palazzo lining the Grand Canal, each one presents the same logistical black hole. The numbers, when aggregated, describe the complete deforestation of a continent, the mobilization of a naval force larger than any military fleet of the era, and an expenditure of energy that had no known power source. They did not build Venice. They inherited it. This brings us to the most damning piece of negative evidence, the utter vacuum of a supporting industrial ecosystem. An operation of this magnitude requires a vast and complex supply chain. Where were the colossal sawmills needed to process millions of logs into uniform piles? A project of this scale would necessitate an industrial timber processing center larger than any city of the time. Where are its ruins, its records? Where were the forges, operating day and night, to create the millions of iron fittings, pile shoes, and tools required? Where were the rope walks, producing thousands of kilometers of industrial-grade rope, only to see it fray and snap under loads they were never designed to bear? And most critically, where is the documentation for the miracle technology at the heart of it all? This act of forgetting was not a single event. It is an ongoing process, a managed demolition of our collective identity. The academic institutions they founded became the guardians of the false narrative. The histories they wrote became the scripture of our amnesia. They created a matrix of control built not on iron bars but on a carefully curated ignorance. We live inside the crime scene, conditioned to call the evidence art and the ruins heritage. We are tenants in our own ancestral home, paying rent to the very entity that murdered our family and hid the bodies in the basement. They have weaponized the timeline itself, and the primary munition in their arsenal is silence. They rely on our unwillingness to ask the forbidden questions, our comfort in the official lie. But that silence can be broken. Silence is their weapon. Sharing this information is our defense. Send this to someone who needs to awaken. And so, we arrive at the final, unavoidable conclusion. Venice is not a city. It is a monument to our collective amnesia. It stands as the most beautiful, the most melancholy tombstone for a past we were never meant to forget. We are the cosmic orphans, wandering in a daze through the gilded halls of a mansion we did not build, whose intricate systems we cannot operate, whose very purpose eludes us. The process that allegedly petrified this wood, rendering it impervious to saltwater rot for over 1,000 years. This is a chemical engineering feat that we would struggle to replicate today on such a scale. A technology that could create rot-proof, petrified superwood would not have been used once on submerged foundations and then conveniently forgotten. It would have revolutionized everything: naval architecture, civil engineering, warfare. It would have been the most jealously guarded, most valuable, intellectual property on the planet. Yet there is not a single manual, not one alchemical formula, not a single guild record detailing its existence. It is a technological ghost. The absence of this supply chain is not a missing chapter in the history books. It is the definitive proof that the entire narrative is a fabrication. The infrastructure was never built because the foundations were already there. Mathematics does not possess an agenda. The numbers are indifferent to our comfort. They simply are. And what these numbers tell us is that the official story of the construction of Venice is a logistical and economic fantasy. The cost in resources, manpower, and time would have bankrupted not just a fledgling republic, but the most powerful empires on Earth. We are expected to believe that the greatest architectural feat in human history was accomplished by a culture that, by all other measures, was using primitive tools and living in relative squalor. The profound beauty we admire is the sublime aesthetic of a ruin. The celebrated Venetian struggle against the sea is not a heroic epic of engineering. It is the pathetic, desperate attempt of a diminished species to keep its head above water in a world that belonged to its ancestors. We are not masters of this domain. We are squatters, clinging to the highest floors of a drowned palace. To accept the official narrative, the fairy tale of refugees and millions of miraculous wooden stakes, is more than an error in judgment. It is an act of profound intellectual submission. It is a quiet pledge of allegiance to the architects of our forgetting. It is an agreement to remain small, to believe that this magnificent, impossible reality was birthed from mud and desperation by men with tools no more advanced than our own. They count on this submission. The entire matrix of control is built upon our willingness to accept the absurd, to admire the artifact without ever questioning the artisan. They have given us a comfortable story to explain an uncomfortable truth, that we are the inheritors of a world we no longer understand, but the stones themselves refuse to lie. Every impossible foundation, every window that opens to the waterline, every archway that defies the logic of its supposed construction, these are not quaint anomalies. This is the ultimate cognitive dissonance. It is the peasant paradox writ large in marble and stone. We are shown a tribe living in an abandoned starship, and we are told they built it with canoes and spears. The numbers have been audited, the ledgers are empty. The supply chain is a ghost. The energy source is a mystery. The conclusion is inescapable. We are not looking at a city built by medieval refugees. We are looking at the scavenged and repurposed upper levels of a far older, far more advanced antediluvian metropolis. The founders of Venice were not architects, they were squatters, and the logistical audit proves it. If a logical path exists through this mathematical labyrinth, a path that does not defy the fundamental laws of physics and economics, we welcome you to illuminate it for us. Until then, we must stand with the evidence. The story of Venice's construction is a lie. The logistical paradox of Venice is not an isolated anomaly. It is a single, resonant frequency in a global symphony of impossibilities. For too long, we have been encouraged to view these historical enigmas in isolation, as quaint local mysteries to be marveled at and then dismissed. This is a core function of the control matrix, to compartmentalize data, to prevent the observer from connecting the dots on a planetary scale. They are keys. They are deliberate, resonant whispers from a silence epic, waiting for a mind willing to listen. The truth of who we are is not written in the history books they authored. It is encoded in the silent, cyclopean engineering they could not erase. To decipher Venice is not an academic exercise. It is an act of reclamation. It is the first step toward remembering not just how to build, but who we were when we built such things. It is about recovering a birthright of knowledge, of capability, of dignity, that has been systematically erased from our memory. This is not about old buildings. It is about the scale of the human soul. The investigation does not end here. It is only the beginning. The evidence is everywhere, hidden in plain sight, waiting for open eyes. If you feel the resonance of this truth in your bones, if you are ready to stop accepting the cover narrative and begin the forensic work of recovering our stolen past, then your journey has just begun. There is more to unearth, more to deconstruct, more to remember. This is the great work of our time. The search for truth is the only real act of rebellion. The investigation does not stop here. If you wish to continue unearthing the truth with us, subscribe and activate the bell. To see the truth, we must abandon the map they have drawn for us. We must zoom out, past the Venetian lagoon, past the Italian peninsula, until the curvature of the earth itself becomes the crime scene. Look now to the north, to the cold, marshy delta of the Neva River. Here lies St. Petersburg, the so-called Venice of the North. We are told this entire imperial city, with its granite embankments, its colossal palaces, and its impossibly intricate cathedrals, was willed into existence from nothing, built upon an uninhabitable swamp by Peter the Great in the early 1700s. The cover narrative is, once again, a tale of heroic vision against impossible odds, but applied the same forensic audit we applied to Venice. The sheer tonnage of stone, the millions of wooden piles supposedly driven into the mire, the advanced stonemasonry and engineering required, all accomplished in a few short decades by a feudal society. The dissonance is deafening. The official art of the era depicts a smattering of wooden huts and primitive barges floating before monolithic, perfectly finished classical structures. It is the same signature, the same cognitive disconnect. A Bronze Age tribe living in an abandoned starship. St. Petersburg was not built. It was found. It was activated. It was another pre-existing power node, unearthed from the mud and reclaimed. Welcome to the resistance. Let the vertigo take you west, to Bruges, to Amsterdam. More Venices of the North. The same story, repeated with local flavor. Cities of merchants who, we are told, grew so wealthy they decided to build architectural masterpieces on the most unstable, waterlogged soil imaginable. The canals, we are taught, were for commerce, but look closer. Look at the water-level doors, the sunken arches, the same telltale signs of a former, lower ground level. The same architectural DNA, the same Greco-Roman obsession with columns, porticos, and domes, appearing as if from nowhere in the heart of medieval Europe. This was not a renaissance, a rebirth of classical knowledge. It was the discovery and frantic retrofitting of a global, standardized architectural template. The fractured skeleton of a single, fallen empire. Now, spin the globe, leap across the Atlantic, before the age of so-called discovery. Look beneath the streets of modern-day Mexico City, and you will find the ruins of Tenochtitlan. The history books paint a picture of an Aztec capital, a city of canals and floating islands, a Venice of the New World. Again, we are presented with the paradox of a technologically primitive culture, practicing human sacrifice, yet capable of constructing a vast, complex, and geometrically perfect metropolis in the middle of a lake.